Hello, everybody, and welcome to our podcast all about the Insight. Our guest today is Tom Wakeman, Insight Director at IGD. Hi, Tom.
Hey Alex, thanks for having me on.
No problem at all. Glad to have you here. So as you know, Tom, this podcast is all about how and why insights matter. What we really want to do is, make sure that insights are first and foremost in most businesses. Before we get to some of that and some of the challenges there, let's start with you. Tell me a little bit about your journey to where you are today.
Yeah, sure. My career dream, believe it or not, as a teenager, was to go into market research. So when I realised that I wasn't going to become a professional footballer, having only managed to scrape into the second 11 at school, I
You
sort
still might.
I
You still might.
thought other avenues might be worth pursuing. So my uncle ran a qualitative agency. So I went and kind of worked summers and holidays with him quite a bit during my school and university. Um, and really enjoyed that. Realised that qualitative research might not be for me, but certainly enjoyed the kind of process, and it ticked a lot of boxes in terms of problem solving, kind of that constant curious itch to understand people and how things work a little bit more. So when I went to university to do marketing, again quite deliberately to get a kind of foundation in the area. And one of the summers that I spent with him, do you remember that MRS used to kind of send all their members a massive book with basically all of their members in, and we just sat down one summer, really thick, and just started circling like potential places to go and work and get on the grad scheme for. So I ended up at TNS, as it was then, TNS World Panel. Spent a few years there getting a kind of really good foundation, I guess, in market research and general practices, and heard the word insights then for the first time, I suppose, and really enjoyed my time there. I worked on individual panels predominantly, which was a little bit different to kind of main world panel. Really interesting, curious clients who were not swimming in data by all accounts at that point. Spent a few years there and then moved to HPI Research, which is the largest independent full service agency in the UK, working on qual-quant projects, so very much ad hoc research, quite a lot of comms stuff as well. Spent a lot of time in the grocery sector there. And again, really started to understand the power of bringing different sources together. At Kantar, obviously, you're very kind of in your lane with the data that you've got. Move to a qual-quant agency and you start with a blank sheet of paper. I think that's what really interested me then. So I spent a long time at HPI, which was great. Then moved to SMG because customer experience research and insights was essentially taking off. And spent a long time at SMG working on customer experience and employee engagement studies. So that was kind of more big data, a bit more data sciencey, a bit sort of verging on the SaaS model. There we were swimming in data, and that was, obviously we've been talking about big data for like 15 or 20 years, but that's when we started to really harness it and understand how we could kind of make it work for our clients. Worked there predominantly on kind of hospitality clients globally, and then moved to IGD about a year ago, which is my like an incredible organization. I'll talk a bit more about it, I guess, in a little bit. And this is the first time I've kind of sat on an exec. Didn't really think that kind of insights people could sit on a kind of broader exec. So really interesting, really proud to represent the team at IGD, and it's a fantastic organization. We've got an amazing transformation going on at the moment.
Great, yeah, and we'll cover that just shortly. I suppose what's interesting as well, though, is we've heard around why you kind of wanted to get into the sector, but what is it about insights, the industry, that intrigues you, that appeals to you, that keeps you here?
Yeah, I think that the stock answer, isn't it, when you interview people in our industry, is it's curiosity, and that definitely is. That's an itch that needs to be constantly scratched for me. Like, I want to understand how people are thinking, how things are working, and how they can be kind of more efficient, better optimized, if you like. I like those challenges and questions that we get from clients all the time. But equally for me, I would describe myself as a storyteller. And unlike an author, this is an occupation where I get to see the penny drop. This is where you see the moment that people realize, oh, there's something interesting here. We can do something with this. And that is what keeps me going day to day and week to week. Those conversations with clients, those kind of aha moments, that keep me going until the day I die. And obviously it all stems from that kind of curiosity piece. But that legacy that you can then potentially leave when you go out into a shop or you go out into a restaurant and you see something that's changed and you think, we contributed to that.
I did that.
That makes you feel good.
Yeah. You can you can recognise the your hand at work. Interested. You just mentioned storytelling there, and storytelling, as we know, has been around for, well, one could argue, thousands of years. But obviously, in its kind of, as we understand it in the insights industry, I think it does have different permutations, different ways of being understood. How do you understand? How would you describe being a storyteller? What does that mean to you?
So I think I've spent my entire life agency side, and the breadth of conversation that you get as a result is really compelling. So the context that we kind of are steeped in, we take it for granted, I think, quite a lot. The conversations that we're exposed to, the clients that we're exposed to, typically are incredible. I think the critical thing for me is helping the client step out of their own world a little bit. A lot of our clients will typically come to us and say, we get our business, we understand our business really well. What we're really struggling with is to kind of bring the outside in. And that for me is where there's a kind of a narrative and a story that typically needs to be weaved into all the research that we do, because you can get very focused on your answering the immediate question and doing it accurately or to the point. But there's always colour and context that it needs to be steeped in order for it to be actionable, in order for it to land with the client. And I think that for me is really critical. And I think the more I've sort of moved through my career, and I guess probably engaged with more senior audiences, the more I've realised that actually those two specific data points, that's not really what's important here. It's more kind of how you weave that story and make the point land, because those two data points aren't going to get remembered. So yeah, I think it just helps with the engagement with what we're doing, and then probably helps with whether that gets implemented properly.
Yeah. The two data points. I mean, I'm biased. I've got a qualitative background, but two data points are probably a bit boring. When you can tell a story, you can say actually the human story behind it is more engaging, isn't it? Okay, brilliant. That's great. Thank you. Let's think around where you currently are, IGD, and you mentioned you're on the exec now. Tell me just a little bit about the kind of current insight scenario and setup at IGD.
Yeah, so IGD is an interesting organisation. Quite, we use the word unique a lot, but it's a genuinely unique organisation. I think in the sense that everything that we do is driven by a charitable status and our commitment to public benefit. So our purpose is to unite and inspire everyone to deliver a thriving food system. And what that means is that we often sit at the centre of really incredible groups of people to understand how we collectively truly deliver a better food system for customers, for businesses, for government. So although I work for a charity, I work on the commercial side. So basically the profits from our commercial operation fund the charitable side of the organisation. So the setup is quite different, and I do think it is unique. We have on the commercial side a number of commercial products, I guess. So we've got a number of subscription services, so like global market intelligence, retailer intelligence, through to kind of shopper research. We've got a consultancy arm, we've got a learning arm, we've got an events arm. So it's quite an interesting variety in terms of the work that we do. And I'm responsible for a team of about 40 people, including an incredible group of analysts based across the globe. And those brains and that intelligence that we have in the organisation is genuinely second to none. I've never worked anywhere with the depth of talent that we've got at IGD. And when you see those guys in front of clients, that's when it really kind of comes to life.
Brilliant. Yeah, yeah. And so you've got the all the power of those brains behind you. What types of things are those brains working on? What are the typical projects, challenges, insight needs that you're working away on?
Yeah, so we work across the food system, so quite wide ranging. So everything from manufacturing, anything that's being sold really within a grocery environment, provided food at restaurants, etc. So it's quite wide ranging. I'd say our main point of difference and the bigger questions that we typically get are around foresight. So we are very, very strong, and we've got some excellent analysts who understand different markets exceptionally well. But then we've got really deep data sets, which allow us to forecast out where we think things are heading over the course of the next kind of 5 years. We'll write a lot of content based on, at the moment, around sort of 2030, even out to 2050 at times. So a lot of the questions that we're getting from clients are around that. And I think we're really well trusted in that area, and it's fascinating because I mean, a lot of my career has very much been based on what happened last week, what happened last month. The conversations that pivot around what's going to happen over the course of the next few years, I think, is really interesting. And I think, yeah, we'll get those kind of questions, what's happened over the course of the last couple of years, but what we're trying to do is apply that to what we then think is going to take
Yeah,
place.
yeah. And in terms of that foresight, that futurescaping or whatever, are there any I don't know, frameworks, models? Are there any ways in which you kind of plot out that future, or is it kind of bespoke for each kind of project? I don't know.
Yeah, we've got some frameworks certainly. So we do a lot of work around forecasting what we're expecting to see around. So if you take the UK, for instance, we
Mm,
work globally. Take the UK in particular, we'll, our social impact team will very much be looking at kind of inflation forecasts over the course of the next few years.
okay.
We'll then be taking that to understand how we're expecting the food system to evolve in terms of market size over the course of the next few years, and even within sort of 34 subsectors within that. So everything from the grocery sector, quick service restaurants, to
Mm,
hotels and prisons and schools. When we talk about food system, we really mean talking about the food system.
yeah, yeah.
So there's that kind of really clear data sets, if you like. And then we'll have a number of models. So, for instance, our store of the future model very much then
Okay.
focuses on this is how we're expecting things, how we're expecting trends, global trends to sort of impact what we think stores are going to look like over the course of the next few years. And that then obviously
Mm,
impacts the conversations we're having with retailers and to some degree with manufacturers as well.
yeah. And without betraying any commercial confidence or anything like that, are you able to give any top line ideas around what that might look? Any interesting tidbits for the future
Well, we've
that you're
got
hearing?
we're publishing a 2030 Shopper of the Future report um, today, actually. Um, we're in March 25 at the moment. Honestly, Alex, it's a little depressing. So, so
I wish I
I
hadn't
don't
asked the
have
question
loads of
now.
good news for you. So when we think about the UK market, for instance, and we're thinking about like how shopping might evolve over the course of the next few years, there are real challenges in terms of obviously cost of living crisis, pricing, inflation within the food system, in particular within energy as well. There's a lot of moving parts on that at the moment, right? So, I mean, depending on what happens with the sort of Ukraine situation, that could have a really big impact on energy prices, etc. But kind of based on where we're at the moment, a lot of the growth in the UK in reality is going to come from immigration. So when we know that birth rates are slowing, we know that people don't have more disposable income, we know that they're trading down. There's a massive evolution into kind of private labels versus branding. So there are some real challenges within the consumer mindset at the moment, and the way that that impacts the food system is really acute because there's a lot of conversations at the moment around health, sustainability. They're huge challenges, they're government challenges, but in reality, people don't have the money to start making
Yeah.
those, the the right choices, if you like. So it's going to remain really tight over the course of the next 5 years. That there's growth is going to come from kind of that population growth, if you like. We're not expecting people to necessarily be able to spend more.
Okay, that makes sense. Um, Whenever you do a foresight project, whenever you do any of your projects, obviously, you're engaging with your clients. How do you know that a piece of insight has landed, that it's worked, that it's hit the mark? What does that feel like to you? What does it look and feel like to your client?
Yeah, I think so. At IGD, we have a really clear point of view on what success looks like from a commercial perspective. A lot of our commercial business is subscription services, so you can imagine
Mm.
we look at kind of broad KPIs in terms of rates for renewal and the like, which is pretty similar to what I imagine to a lot of insight agencies on
Hmm.
kind of longer term contracts. So I guess that's the end goal. But we have really extraordinarily long-standing relationships with our clients. So IGD has been going for coming up to 120 years now.
Oh wow.
A lot of the relationships that we've had with clients from a commercial standpoint are, 20 plus years old. So we're very fortunate to be quite embedded within organizations. I guess when we're presenting our insights work, the and we're thinking about the foresight stuff in particular, it's you don't present to many quiet rooms. We've all been in those presentations where you've got a group of people who will just sit there, absorb the information, and then just kind of leave. By talking quite future focused, by talking about great case studies from around the world, we get huge engagement in the room. So um, that's typically like a really good measure of success, right? And also how likely you are to be called back in the next few months. Um, so I guess that's what good looks like for us. But as I said, like my passion is seeing those penny drop moments for our clients, and you
Yeah, yeah.
at the moment those conversations are really challenging. You asked that question, what we're going to see in the next 5 years. There's no sugarcoating it. It's tough.
But I
It's
think it's
really
like,
tough.
yeah, it's incumbent on us. One thing I learned early in my career was, you know, the data, the research. It is what it is. Now, we can argue about why it's like that, but that's it. So, let's work with it as it is and kind of understand it, where it comes from, why it's like that, how it might change. Yeah, there is no point sugarcoating, as you say.
Yeah.
Okay. That, really interesting kind of overview of IGD there as well, and some of the work that you do. I'm interested, kind of practically and as stories of any times when you've really felt that insights have led to better business decisions, either in your current role or over your career. Can you pinpoint any occasions where it's all gone bang on, everybody's been great, and it's been a really interesting piece of insight?
Yeah, I think so. It's really interesting, isn't it? Because every client, when they're commissioning a project or they start a relationship with an agency, will talk about the partnership that they want to be having, and quite often that doesn't quite evolve in the way that you'd want it to. The ones that really stand out to me are the more longer term relationships where you
Hmm.
you build true partnerships, and as an agency you start to get under the skin of different departments, and how the cogs are starting to work together. um, I think it's a little more difficult at IGD to kind of link commercial uplift with some of the work that we do, especially because we're kind of so
Okay.
forward looking at
Hmm.
times. But certainly where that's been done most effectively for me in the past has been we would typically overinvest in the relationship in the first few months
Mm.
to try and prove out true links with our clients' commercial KPIs, so that every time, as a quantity, every time you're saying an uplift of 5%, an uplift of 6%, customer sentiment is changing by X%, we could relay that back to actually this is what really means for your business. Um, and that sort of overinvestment at the start of a relationship, I think, makes a massive difference. Like that work is typically really tough to do. We often shy away from it. Let's be honest, at agencies in particular. But where we can prove out that commercial link, I think you start to have much more compelling conversations.
Mm, mm.
Um, and that's where, as a storyteller as well, you can then start to bring the outside in perspective. So you can sort of set the scene a little in terms of this is what's different about your organization versus your competitors, because we're often
Yeah,
working with competitors as well, or this is the kind of learnings that we're seeing coming in from other
definitely.
markets.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier on, kind of aha moments. Any standouts that you can think around, or any occasions when you have seen whatever it is, but your work in the street, in the shop, whatever.
Yeah, so I've worked with some of the bigger um, quick service restaurants over the
Hmm.
years, and you see, particularly during COVID, we saw a massive shift in terms of um, the digitalization of the experience and helping optimize that experience was like a really significant thing that we were doing with some of the global sort of fast food chains, if you like. The big thing for me though that I keep coming back to with my team, and I have done this for years now, is I have this obsession that the agencies and insight folks love to see an aha moment in the final presentation.
Yeah, yeah,
And we'll
yeah,
often try and hold things back a little bit because we want to see that happen in the
yeah, yeah,
moment.
yeah.
We
You,
kind of
you, you
there's
want to get it,
maybe a
yeah,
bit of an ego thing
yeah, yeah,
about
yeah,
like being the one responsible for it. But the key thing for me is um, I, I've got to understand and know those clients where I've had the most, certainly the most lasting legacies.
hmm,
I would be meeting stakeholders throughout the research progress and getting their input constantly. You see those aha moments in those kind of meetings, not necessarily the end presentations.
okay, yeah,
Um, and then in those kind of final presentations, those final deliverables, being able to present and have, I know you've got advocates in the room who've already started thinking about, well, I'm not going to, I'm not going to get fired upon about this research. I know there's a problem in this area, but I've already got an answer to it. Building that kind of collaboration, that's true partnership. And I think that for me has been quite a critical learning for me over the course of the last sort of 10 or 15 years. Not waiting till the end, working like really thoroughly leading up
yeah.
to the moment.
And yeah, partnership, as you say, is critical for all of this. It's daft thing to say, but it starts at the beginning, doesn't it? In terms of partnership, have you found any particularly good styles, strategies, tactics of building those partnerships with clients?
I think it's breadth. So
Hmm.
again, I think to some of the teams that I often get quite embedded into, so like ops teams, potentially HR, even HR teams, because the execution of some of this is often very people dependent. Getting outside of the insight team, I think, is really critical. Often quite difficult because you may have clients who like to kind of hold on to that relationship, um, but all of those guys have the same fundamental problems in terms of they don't have the same conversations that we would have.
Okay.
Um, so, and they're also so in the detail that the what you think is an amazing and compelling point, and it might well be based on the data or based on the customer feedback, doesn't mean it can be implemented at the organization. So understanding that ops team, the HR team, those support teams who are actually going to be able to execute, I think the more detail and the more understanding you've got from those groups prior to the kind of end deliverables, or as it informs the research processes you're going through, I think is really critical.
Yeah, getting to know, as you say, more than just the marketing manager or the insight manager, actually knowing the ops, the delivery team is
Yeah.
and understanding their world. I was speaking to somebody recently, and they said exactly the same thing, that kind of spending a day in somebody else's shoes as such just gives you a better understanding of how the research can be positioned more effectively for those teams.
Yeah, 100%. Like the best days I've had with clients are out in stores or out in restaurants. It's working in the kitchen for 2 or 3 hours and understanding the processes. It's working behind the scenes, stacking shelves, understanding, how it all works and how it all comes together. And I think
Mm.
we Yeah, we have to kind of get back to the floor sometimes to just help us understand that, and also have conversations with the colleagues, because they're often a fountain of knowledge, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Customers only see the front end. There's so much behind the scenes that needs to be optimized.
100%. Let's think. Okay, so you've run your foresight project, you've run whatever project, you've done an initial debrief maybe. Are there any other ways in which you kind of really share and embed the insights within an organisation?
Yeah, I think it depends on how the organization is set up. But where I've done this most effectively in the past, I think, is, again, it's probably an overinvestment of time. But if that, let's say your presentation is to a cross-functional audience, that's your kind of best case scenario typically,
Hmm.
isn't it, at the end of the research process? Um, Getting out with store managers, getting out with franchisees, regional managers, other teams, I think is really important. And I think generally, if we're commissioned by the insight team or whoever it is,
Mm.
that's typically, their part of their role, part of their responsibility.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but again, kind of drafting in someone external brings a slightly different level of independence, a slightly
Okay.
different angle on things. So I think that's really important. I think the other piece for me is that we've spent probably the last 20-25 years trying to really focus and define our key audiences that we
Hmm.
speak to. Um, Certainly in my last role, I'd say at IGD as well, the democratization of data, but making it really easy to understand, I think is really important. So putting it in everybody's hands as much as possible so that they're using it day to day, again, I think has made a big difference for us. So rather than saying we're only going to give you 20 licenses for your absolute super users, we say anyone should use this data. We want to drive that uh, usage as much as physically possible, so that we're changing the language that you're using within the organization and changing the culture that you're looking at within the organization. And I'd imagine over the course of the next few years that AI will only probably play a better role in helping that, because it'll reduce the opaqueness of some of our complex data
Mm.
sets. I think it should help put that into more people's hands, I think.
Definitely, and AI was a point I wanted to explore. I suppose I just want to understand as well, in terms of not everything always goes swimmingly. Let's be perfectly
Yeah.
honest. We have ups and downs. We have challenges. In terms of challenges that we might face with clients, are there any typical challenges? And again, any ways in which or any effective strategies to resolve those challenges?
So I think challenges generally come from a lack of knowledge. So I kind of go back to what I was saying in terms of, if you've got broad relationships and you're
Mm.
talking to a number of people, but critically you're talking to them early enough.
Okay.
So you don't just do stakeholder interviews on day one. You want to keep those conversations flowing over the course of your project, over the course of
Mm.
the relationship. Then the problems will still come up, but at least you're bubbling them up early enough that you
Mm.
can
Mm.
manage them through. I think the worst deliverables that I've been in is, and because you're not that confident when you walk into the room, right? That you're just not convinced it's going to land. It may well
Mm.
then not land. You get those silent rooms
Mhm.
which are really difficult to present to, um, and it's typically because you've not got the right advocates in the room, and you've
Mhm.
not built the right knowledge over the course of over the course of that research cycle, if you like. So I think
Fine.
that for
Yeah.
me is
Yeah.
really critical.
So having those advocates in the room, but to get those advocates, you need to build those relationships from point one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So on AI, then I think we are at a bit of a kind of turning point cusp. It is becoming more and more part of the everyday toolbox. Now, again, that's not to say it's not without challenges, but tell me a little bit about AI. What are the challenges? What are the possibilities that you see with AI as we go forward?
I think the challenges are, there's probably two or three challenges in terms of the usage of AI at the
Mm.
moment. The first is that there are a bunch of people who are quite scared to use it, and I don't think people really know how to use, if we're talking about your kind of chats of the world, how to really prompt in the right way and kind of get the responses you would expect. And I think there's either like utter skepticism, it's quite polarizing, utter skepticism that how can you possibly get the right answer out of this tool, versus, oh well, this is the response I've got, therefore it's gospel. And in reality,
Easy. Don't do that.
it's pretty muddy between the two, right? So I think that we're still really early stages in terms of usage, and I don't think people have quite made some of those learnings just yet. In terms of where it's going, I mean, we see it as a massive opportunity. I mean, we're, as I said to you, we look at foresight quite a lot. A lot of our work is kind of global market intelligence. When you're forecasting out results, there's a huge amount of manual labor that kind of goes into that. And as I said at the beginning, where I, as probably has come across over the course of the last half an hour, like, I'm a big believer in analysts and insights folks being in front of clients, and that's really where we're delivering value. So the more time we can strip out of the process and make more efficient in the research process, automate some of that, as far as I'm concerned, then the more time that we can be spending in front of clients, still with the same trusted data. So we see it as a huge opportunity, I think, over the course of the next few years to automate some of our really manual jobs that no one wants to be doing, and then kind of get out and do the stuff where we're really delivering value.
Okay. So obviously the big concern is, the robots are going to replace us, but actually, they are freeing us up to go and add value.
That's the hope, right? I mean, I read a book recently of it had four likely scenarios for
Okay.
AI. The robots taking over, I'm afraid, was one of the scenarios. But the most likely scenario, this is where I kind of certainly see it based on experience so far, it's got quite early days, is that it will essentially increase. There's an opportunity for us to increase our productivity. Productivity in the UK, from a labour perspective, has remained basically static for the last kind of 20 years since the credit crunch. So is this just kind of the next evolution? Is this basically the equivalent of the computer? We're going to automate some tasks, we'll automate some roles for sure, but it means that we'll be quicker about doing the value add, and we'll be able to get in front of clients, build relationships. That's the scenario we're planning for, put it that way, and that's the hope.
And it kind of circles neatly back in, as you say, to your ideas of breadth and kind of adding that value with clients and having that ongoing immersion, for want of a better word. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, it's something that I think every research agency is grappling with, and kind of we're all taking steps here and steps there, but an interesting time to be sure. Coming to the end in terms of our quick chat, as you look back on your career, are there any golden lessons, golden insights, golden rules that you would look back on, or wish that somebody had told you when you were looking through that MRS big book?
Yeah, I think the obvious piece for me is like that commercial link. So that everything that we do, we need to talk in a client's language in order for it to land most effectively. The more links that we can make, obviously, with their data sets, the better. I think a lot of that work is often very hard to do, but that doesn't make it not worth doing. And I think increasingly with a bit of a morphing of kind of insights and research professionals and data science professionals, there's a real opportunity there to sort of start bringing those data sets together and helping our clients. And then the second piece for me is getting out there. There's no replacement, there's no substitute for spending time with clients. But when I think about spending time with clients, I'm also thinking about how you get out into shops, how you get out into restaurants, whatever it is, to help you understand things from the ground up. Because I think the most successful organizations that I've worked with over the years, you speak to their teams and they really understand what happens at the base level. They understand the interactions that customers are having with their teams.
Yeah.
And that's where there's real, often low hanging fruit, but that's where the juice is really worth the squeeze, I think.
So what's your final kind of question? We at this podcast are all about, kind of supporting insights and selling the benefits of insights. Is the one golden tip that you would have for making insight matter more? What's the one thing that we can do to build the profile, build a reputation to make insight matter more?
Yeah, I think, yeah, for me, it's talking in the right language. So as the storyteller, take a step away from your desk, from your understanding, put yourself in who you're trying to influence, put yourself in their shoes, talk in their language, talk in their day job. That for me is like a really critical barrier to overcome. And I think it can be quite difficult for a lot of us who are a lot of insight professionals are naturally introverted, don't necessarily kind of really want to get into that conversation necessarily. But I think that's where you see the most effective output, and that's where I think legacies are generally left.
Nice. Yeah, it's an interesting point in terms of the idea of different characters and personalities within the industry, but ultimately, we're all wanting to step forward into this new brave world. Tom, that has been brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Lovely to have you.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Alex.